Hey everyone, I had the pleasure of speaking with Dick Hamilton, the composer of the original soundtrack for Monster Plantation at Six Flags Over Georgia, as well as many other compositions in various themed entertainment and branding areas. He was kind enough to spend some time chatting about his involvement working on Monster Plantation in addition to other projects. You may be surprised to hear how hands-on he was in syncing the animatronic visuals to the wonderful soundtrack he created. This was recorded with a pretty simple setup, so please excuse any audio issues you may hear. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dick Hamilton. I'm just curious about how you got involved with this project in the first place and how that turned out.
I started doing projects with Alvaro V. He had been with Disney, and he was responsible for a lot of the Disney World and Disneyland rides.
Yeah.
Disneyland anyway, Pirates of the Caribbean and, all this stuff. And formed his own company. And I don't remember who it was that introduced us.
Mm-hmm.
But I started doing the projects he was doing, and of course this was one of them. And there were quite a few different projects for Six Flags Company, parks in different places. So basically that was it. And this was like any of the others. When the project started, I went out to his place out in Valencia and looked at the drawings and all the beginnings of stuff for the whole layout, what stuff was going to look like and what it was going to do and what the plots were, and we decided where there were going to be sounds and what kinds of sounds, where it was music. Once I knew what the music was supposed to be, the first thing I could start doing was writing the music, because most of it, the music wasn't cued to stuff. The motions would be cued to the music.
Yeah.
And so I could start that before getting timings on some of the other stuff that happened. So anyway, it grew from that. That was the way we always worked together. But when they get the characters put together, they might not have all of the outer pieces done, all the skin and the clothes and all of that. But once the mechanical parts of it were done, then I was always able to go back, and then I could take some measurements. If things were happening to cue to the music, I could do things like, at the tempo the music was going to be, I could move the actuator that would actually move the solenoid that would make that particular thing, say one arm of the drummer, what
Okay.
And depending on the mass of the moving piece, they were all they would all take a different length of time to go through whatever their motion was, and then on releasing the trigger to go back to zero. So what I did was make a list of all the different separate motions and how many, at the tempo the thing was going, how many beats or fractions of a beat the actuator needed to be made for it to happen on a particular beat. And then I could go back and basically choreograph the thing. One of the things that was totally different about this was there was a lot of stuff that was happening. There's a kind of a Dixieland band with, how you're familiar with the ride. So the Dixieland band and the country band and the Crazy Birds and the people that were involved that were in sync with the walk-in music or the ride-in music that starts at the beginning with the vocal on it. Mm-hmm. Back in those days, it was before most of it was digital. So all of the music for all of the things that were in sync with one another were all on the same 8-track, 1-inch playback. And we had 2 tapes, two playback machines. And the thing was, with animatronics, up until that point, this was the first time we'd done anything where I really wanted to. I loved the characters, and the guy that was playing a bass drum, which was his stomach, and the one that was playing a clarinet, that was his nose. And I wanted him to actually be rhythmically correct for what you were hearing. That's when I found out they'd never actually done that before. What they did on all the Disney stuff and all the earlier stuff was that they had a bunch of filters, and they would run the music through a filter. Say if it was something visible like the arm beating a bass drum, they would try to find something that was regular enough so that if they filtered out all the other stuff, the sensor would respond to that frequency range, whatever the frequency range of the filter was.
Yeah, I see.
And so that it would affect just the arm that was beating the bass drum. but it was really inexact. And if you got a bass drum and you've also got bass, they're going to be crossing the same frequency range in some places.
Right.
And so then it starts to look crazy. So then they have to put in devices like one thing they call a one-shot, which keeps it from responding more than once within a certain time period, however long you set the threshold on the one-shot thing. And then sometimes that stopped it from working when it should have. And so there's all this fine-tuning, and it takes days and days to get it to where it looks like anything makes sense. They accepted all of that. I asked the tech guys, what is the frequency range of the filters? How far apart do the tones need to be rejected by the next one down or the next one up? And basically what he told me in terms of percentage came out musically to be about a minor third. So anyway, from the information I got from him, I realized if I gave them sine waves, a different frequency for each one of the events that was going on, as long as they were a minor third apart, their filter system could recognize one from the other. So then I went over and fine-tuned the thing that I had made in terms of the masses of the different things. Once I knew what I wanted them to be doing, and wrote down a thing, basically a rhythm sheet there was nothing but the rhythm of the trigger pulses that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And the whole reason for doing this was that there were nowhere near enough tracks to have a separate track for each trigger. We were hard put with all the different characters and voices and stuff. Out of 16 playback tracks, they have enough tracks for everything that was going on in the ride to begin with. This allowed me to record all of the trigger pulses as sine waves, separated by at least a minor third, and they all fit onto 2 tracks of the 8. So I had all the triggers for everything for the whole ride on 2 tracks on the playback machine. And they just flipped out. I mixed down I think it was the Dixie Band was the first one I mixed down along with the trigger tracks and took it out there. And they put it on and they plugged everything in and turned it on, and everything worked and everything was exactly in tempo. And they just stood there with their jaws dropped and said, I've never seen anything like that before. It would have taken us weeks to get it to look like that. So that was my contribution to the art in general, and that I have no idea if anybody else or any other company started using that technique. I mean, it wasn't a secret. They could have found out what it was if they'd wanted to. Mm-hmm. But that's what I used from then on for all of the different things that I did for Arvaro.
That caught me off guard when you said you did a little bit of work with the animatronics, because I just thought it'd be more of a hands-off kind of a deal. You compose the music and you send it off to them, and that's that.
That's the way it would have been, except that then I found out it wasn't going to be what I was envisioning in my head, seeing the way this living cartoon was working, because that's what it was supposed to look like.
I mean, that attention to detail is great, because sometimes in cartoons, you'll see like the drummer is playing a completely different beat than what you hear, or someone's playing a saxophone in their hands in the wrong spot, and like all these things. There are inconsistencies if you know what you're looking for and stuff. I mean, they get by with it, but it's really nice to have that attention to detail that I never knew about before. So that's incredible.
Those are the things you just described are the things that drive us nuts, musicians, if we go to a movie. There have been a few movies about musicians where the actors actually bothered to learn the mechanics of the instrument they were supposed to be playing, to the extent that I could look at them and believe that they were playing it. It's the difference between what you just described and what they could have done, which is what these other people did. And I wanted the ride to come off that way, so that once people got into it, and that determined the layout of everything in terms of the playback of what was going to be on what reel and where, because as the ride progresses, as you come in, you hear the entrance music with a vocal on it, and then as you get a little farther away from the entrance, in front of you, you hear the Dixieland group, but they're playing the same thing, and it's exactly the same time as it's in sync. Yeah. And you go past that, and then you hear the country group, and they're playing the same thing in country style, and it's also in sync. It was an interesting project recording that stuff back in the day.
That's one of the questions I wanted to get into. I wanted to talk about your inspiration, but yeah, recording. I heard your daughter sung the lyrics. Is that true? And yeah, who was on that track?
And my son, and one of our nieces.
Okay.
And my wife, who also, she was a great studio singer, and she could sound like a kid, particularly she was singing with the kids. Yeah, that was family.
Cool. Are you on that track too?
Oh, yeah. I'm one of the crazy birds, and, there are these statements between the kid singers and then the grumpy whatever they are singing nonsense, and I'm one of the nonsense singers.
Cool. So yeah, you were mentioning this project sounds a little more collaborative than I would have expected, honestly.
We did a lot of stuff that was very collaborative because Alvaro was that kind of guy, and he would come up with ideas, and he surrounded himself with people who were geniuses at what they did. The mechanical guys, just to go into that shop and look at the skeletons of these things and the beautiful craftsmanship and, in stainless and making all of their own solenoids and all of the stuff. You couldn't go anywhere and buy something of that quality.
Yeah.
He just instilled that in everybody. And if anybody got an idea that applied to some part of it other than what they were doing, he was the first one who wanted to know about it and get it in there and make it work.
So with that, did he give you, or Big Albertino or any of these guys, did they give you a creative vision of, hey, we want it to be a Dixie band, we want it to be this band? Or you just kind of, you see what's going on, they tell you the story, and you're like, I hear a melody right now, I know what instruments to use. How does that come together?
Yeah. I don't think anybody ever said Dixie band, but with the character playing his nose, the first thing I thought of, was a clarinet and the way it would sound. And particularly a Dixie band is good because all the instruments are playing all the time in the ensembles. So it makes sense for as much motion to be happening as possible. Oh, then that was another thing too. With all this stuff, I was happy that on my side of the argument, which had been an argument before, technically there were not enough tracks to do what they would like to have done, which is, say with like the Dixie band, to have each one of the instruments on a separate track so that there would be a speaker by, hidden someplace within or right near each one of the things, and it would come out. And I argued against that vehemently because then I would not have had a chance to do the mix. Whoever was in there messing with knobs could change the mix at any old time, let's turn this one up a little bit. The thing was, with all the different things going on, there's no way that they were going to install enough machines, and there was no way to make them run in sync in any more tracks than was on any one single machine anyway. So I said, this is what I want to do. I want you to install really nice pair of stereo speakers, one on each side of the set, and give me, drawings with measurements as to where each one is going to be. And I'll do a stereo mix and put that sound in that spot so that anybody who's in front of the display will hear it coming from that particular place. But then the whole thing will be on 2 tracks and it'll be mixed. Nobody can mess with it. They can turn it up and down, but equally, and you'll hear it all coming from there. And they were kind of doubtful. But anyway, the first mix that I did when they had the whole set of that particular band, again, I think it was the Dixie band, the setup, we played it back and everybody was just grinning because they heard the clarinet coming from where the clarinet thing was, and they heard the banjo, from where it was. And that. So anyway, we settled that. And so all the stuff that I did for them, I was able to mix and put on a stereo pair according to where their setup was. Oftentimes I didn't do the final mix until pretty late in the game because they were still in the middle of the setup, and sometimes the things they planned to do when they got to the actual spot they were putting it, there had to be some changes made of some kind.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of thing is something that really makes a difference too, that directional kind of audio that you're talking about. It's one of those things, kind of like the bass drum hitting right on beat and not going crazy or a little bit off beat or something. It's something that won't pull you out of the moment, and kind of everything's consistent and it flows, and it just, nothing's distracting you in that kind of way.
That's it. It's just like reading science fiction, suspension of disbelief. That was the whole business we were in with those things.
Yeah, you guys do a great job with it. A lot of people have a ton of memories with this stuff, so absolutely.
Well, that ride has been there forever. That's probably the longest one that I've ever been involved with that I know of. And the only reason I know about it is because they asked if they could have a new audio master after the first 20 years. So I made them a new one and sent it off.
Was that during the Monster Mansion transition that they did that?
Yeah.
Did you do any updates to the music, or just remaster everything and send it over?
No, I just made them new copies of the stuff. I know they did some other stuff in the ride. I don't even know what it was, but I didn't have anything to do with those.
Gotcha. Do you remember who wrote the lyrics?
I did.
That was all you?
Oh, yeah.
It's so funny. So I live in the Atlanta area, and you can pretty much any friend group or anything, Six Flags comes up, people will talk about Monster Mansion, they'll bring it up, and there's always someone, or if not everyone, who knows those lyrics, at least that first hook that comes in. So it really is connected with people. Is that something you wrote the whole song with in mind?
Oh, sure. Yes, and I wanted it to be something that it didn't bother them, that they remembered. Like, people get really mad and it's a small world.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that.
Definitely not. It's looked at in a positive way.
That's basically what a large part of my career was, that, because I did an awful lot of radio and TV commercials and so on. So I always considered my job was to get into people's heads, either make them feel something, make things feel familiar.
Yeah. I was going to ask about your history with that. Is there any work that you've done that, the general public or, theme park fans in general would know?
Oh, yeah. It's one of the areas that I did enough work in to become basically the bar. I mean, where you set the bar. All the people in the business of doing radio ID packages, IDs and promos and so on, which start with just a little, just the call letters in between tunes. But I wrote whole song length things. And I did those packages for radio and TV stations all over the country. Like I said, everybody else in the business tried to copy the stuff that I was doing. So it was fun. I could do anything I wanted to, because whatever I thought of was state of the art.
Cool.
And again, lyrics had a whole lot to do with it,
Yeah, it's a catchy one. You got a gift there, definitely.
Thanks.
I think there was a couple other questions I had for you. Like I said earlier, it took me by surprise that you were so hands-on with the project. Were you able to visit Six Flags once the ride opened and just hear everything in full operation and see people's reactions and stuff like that?
No, I never had the time. Well, I shouldn't say never. There's one, we did one in Houston for NASA.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what it was called, but we actually did go over. They invited us over, and we actually did make time to go over for the opening of that. That was kind of neat. But and the Wax Museum in Buena Vista, in south of Los Angeles. That was close by. We actually drove down and heard that after it was installed. But I would love to have, but there just wasn't time at that time to do it.
Yeah. There's one more main question I have here, and you're welcome to add anything you want, because really, if you want to go back into talking about programming the animatronics, I'll sit here all day if you want. I won't take up too much of your time, though. So I'm sure you're somewhat aware, but there was that ride in that building before they made Monster Plantation. There was a ride called Tales of the Okefenokee. That one had an original soundtrack, too. And out of curiosity, do you know anything about the music about that predecessor ride, Tales of the Okefenokee?
No, it seems to me that somebody mentioned it once, but it didn't really have anything to do with what I was doing.
Coincidentally, it has the kind of same rhythm and everything. It's kind of that New Orleans jazz kind of swing to it. It's just kind of funny they line up a little bit.
That's a handy kind of thing to use for this kind of a job. It works, and it's got the kind of feel you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and particularly in one with like the Monster Plantation, where once you get into the swamp, it's like I was basically scoring a horror film, So it's real good to set up a contrast like that if you've got something that's really up where it's up, because then it can be really down where it's down.
So yeah, that's probably one of the most iconic parts of the ride, because it's bright and colorful, and then you turn this corner and it's dark and they're monsters, and it's actually terrifying.
I was knocked out when I saw basically the storyboards, because that's the way they drew it out, and it was just great, just night and day kind of thing.
Yeah, they kind of pull the rug out from under you, and your work has something to do with that too, because as far as I can tell, there's a timpani rolling and crescendos and big swells and just dissonant, growly music.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not going to take up your entire afternoon, but is there anything else you want to add or comment about this?
Well, there's one thing that you might, since it wasn't actually in an amusement park and it wasn't in the United States, you might not know about. Did you know about a couple of things. One was the underwater dragon palace at Beijing.
Okay.
And it's in a lake, which is evidently a reservoir outside of Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a submarine ride. There are traditional dragons in Chinese folklore, and everybody knows what they look like. So they were able to paint them and sculpt them, to get all the details. But they had to deal with a couple of guys that came over from China that's what they were there for, was to make sure that it looked like they'd always looked. But I was making voices for them.
Uh-huh.
With a synthesizer, and I was one of the original Moog synthesizer people, and I realized that I had free reign because I'd never had voices before, so nobody could say that's not what they sounded like. So anyway, that was a fun one, and there was a lot of music involved in that too. It was original, but I was writing in the style of the Chinese composers early on. And then there was another one in Japan, a display of dinosaurs. They were all animatronics dinosaurs. They were huge. When I went over, it just knocked me out seeing them standing there, a couple stories tall in the shop. I had to decide what they sounded like when they roared and did whatever they did. And there were family groupings and so on. And I actually produced the sounds with the Moog synthesizer. I based them on, since birds are the result, they came from dinosaurs originally. That's what everybody feels. That's the direction that it came. Mm-hmm. So sampling different birds around and then slowing them down 3 or 4 octaves to see what they sound like if they were, huge, and so on. And that gave me the basis of a lot of sounds, which then unduplicated and recorded whole groups of sounds, some of which were just basically feeding kind of mutters, or some were like the T-Rex, of course, has got to be attacking and so on. But then a lot of them were family scenes and so on. And that's probably the most difficult one I ever did.
Sounds like Steven Spielberg could have used your help over on Jurassic Park.
Well, what was funny was Jurassic Park came out about 3 weeks after our display went on, which was a couple of months after I'd finished doing the sounds. And when I went to see it specifically to find out what did they do. Some of them I thought was just a cheap way out because they were combinations of existing roars of different existing animals kind of mixed together.
Yeah.
But some of them were pretty good. And the ones that were good sounded almost exactly like the ones that I made, which I thought was really neat.
It's validating for sure.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I mean, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your willingness to do this.
Oh, sure. Well, it was a pleasure. I'm glad people are interested, and I'm glad it's still going on. That's great.
Thank you all so much for listening. I once again want to thank Dick Hamilton for sharing his time and his insight. I have 100 follow-up questions for him after this wonderful conversation, but I hope you all enjoyed and got a kick out of the info he shared. Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out my full Tales of the Okefenokee and Monster Mansion documentary. There are article versions available as well on storybookamusement.com. Until next time, thank you for tuning in, and stay out of the marsh.